Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning. My name is Noura bint Saud bin Naif Al Saud, and I'm the founder of Al Mashtal, a Saudi-based platform dedicated to developing the conditions that allow talent to move from informal into sustainable livelihood. And I would like to thank the Ministry of Economy and Planning and the Cultural Development Fund for giving me this opportunity. And today, I'd like to talk about how culture can turn into economic infrastructure and how we can turn it into shared prosperity if the right conditions exist. So after coming back from London and studying design, I wanted to create work that was culturally rooted but globally relevant, grounded in Saudi Arabia's deep, rich, and cultural heritage. The idea was simple, but the reality was not. After working with many creative studios, cultural organizations across the country, a pattern emerged. Talent was strong, but the systems around them were thin or missing. And by systems, I mean the conditions that help make creative infrastructure stronger and last longer. And by these conditions, I mean access to markets, affordable production environments, quality standards for pricing, and funding that can reduce early risk. So after starting and opening Al Mashtal, what we tried to do was, how can we then turn that and create that environment in order to start building those? And Al Mashtal was created to address that specific gap, not to celebrate creativity, but to make it viable, to help ideas survive beyond intention and work to become priced, produced, protected, and sustained. Now, for those who don't speak Arabic, Al Mashtal means a plant nursery. And as you know, a plant nursery is not some place where plants are admired. It is a place where the conditions exist so that they can take root, withstand pressure, and survive beyond controlled conditions. This metaphor matters. But in practical terms, it meant building a platform where talent, opportunity, and infrastructure could meet. And this is not theoretical. And I'm going to show you a few examples of how we do that. So this is Saad. Saad was a young finance student from Abha who had a quiet passion for photography and filmmaking. His equipment got stolen, and he couldn't find a way to continue developing and practicing his craft. We met him while we were on a project, a documentary filmmaking project across Saudi Arabia. He was young, but he had real talent. So what we did was, we brought him onto the project, we paid him fairly, and showed him what professional standards and conditions of filmmaking looks like. And this changed his trajectory completely. Today, Saad is an established documentary filmmaker. He has worked on major government projects, won awards, and runs his own film production company. And here, talent didn't happen by accident. This is when opportunity, structure, and real work start to align and creates this opportunity. Another one is Sira. So Sira is one of the first all-female Saudi rock bands. And they met during an event at Al Mashtal. And what started as an informal encounter turned into a serious practice. What we did was provide them with an affordable, professional-grade space to be able to rehearse, write, record, and perform. We also helped them to understand contracts and what it means to be signed by labels. And then we also gave them a place to test their work with real audiences. Today, Sira has just completed their first European tour. They have released new music, and they have their own merchandise line. And they've also toured all around Saudi and the region. And this is what happens when talent is able to meet talent, but also stay long enough to mature. And this is Salah. So Salah was working for years in large branding organizations, creating other people's work. But after a while, he started to turn that work into something that's tangible. They started asking him for cultural products, anything that needed to be made real. And he built that experience. But what he really wanted was a clear pathway to turn that experience into a sustainable business. And this is where the Makers Lab comes. I see the Makers Lab as a compressed version of the creative economy. And with the support of the Cultural Development Fund, we were able to build the lab and design it to industry standards and allow people to come test their ideas against real constraints, which includes quality, price, time, materials, and turn that into work that can then be sold. In 2024, Salah joined one of our programs and became part of this environment. By November of that same year, he registered his company and launched Jadb Studio. And today, he has showcased his work across multiple locations during the Saudi International Handicrafts Week. He has received commissions from major entities and continues to grow his practice. And this is what happens when conversion happens at a small scale. But when we look at what's happening at a larger scale, the shift becomes much bigger. Today in Saudi, there's a real move that's happening. Vision 2030 looked at culture as an economic system, not as a symbolic layer. And since then, the contribution has been amazing. Since 2018, the cultural's GDP contribution has doubled from 30 to 60 million riyals. Over 81 billion riyals have been invested in cultural infrastructure. More than 230,000 workers work across 51,000 cultural businesses. And cultural graduates have increased almost 80%. What's even more important is that the ministry has recognized over 130 creative occupations and made it official. What that means, it gave it job titles. And that's really important because when work can be named, it can be contracted, it can be measured, and it can be financed. But this is only part of the infrastructure. Because building culture as infrastructure does not stop at production. To understand why outcomes still fall short, we need to examine how demand translates or fails to translate into stable livelihoods. Today, platforms built entirely on cultural production reach global audiences at an unprecedented speed and volume. Let me paint a picture. Radio took 38 years to reach 50 million users. Television took 14. The internet took 4 years. Instagram Threads was able to reach 100 million users in just 5 days. And I'm not talking about a technology story. This is a cultural consumption story. What spreads fastest in modern economy is not energy, logistics, or hardware. It is human expression packaged as content, design, images, games, music. And these are no longer niche markets. These are mass global industries generating over trillions of dollars worth and engaging over 50 million workers worldwide. Yet, this demand does not translate into income stability. In most skilled labor markets, demand leads to higher wages and security. That relationship is broken in the cultural and creative sector. Because value concentrates where platform owners control distribution, data, and scale. And creatives are left to carry production cost up risks, upfront risks, and income instability. And the result is a persistent gap between value creation and value capture. Because typically creators are paid per unit, a view, a stream, a license, a project, and rarely participate in the upside once work scales. And as a result, participation remains informal, not because demand is weak, but because the conversion systems are weak. And when this layer is missing, the cost goes beyond economics. People disengage early, before skills deepen, before specialization develops, and before innovation can occur. At scale, this weakens the economy's ability to renew itself, because innovation is built on accumulated practice, not raw talent. And over time, economies also lose opportunity. They become consumers of global culture rather than producers and exporters of their own. And cultural identity turns into something that is watched, streamed, and imported, not turned into long-term value or enterprises or jobs. And this is why cultural infrastructure matters beyond the creative sector itself. It formalizes participation without stripping away individuality. And as the Deputy Minister spoke today, that a red line is how do we hold on to our heritage? How do we hold on to our identity and our values? And standardizing it is not controlling what people create, but formalizing the conditions around creation. That includes ownership rights, production, payment terms, contracts. And this allows creative work to scale economically without losing unique identity. And this is also why markets alone cannot solve the problem, even when demand is strong. Creative work, as I've shown, involves high upfront risk, uncertain early value, and assets that are difficult to price or secure at the beginning. And in those conditions, private capital behaves rationally by underinvesting. And here, institutions like the Cultural Development Fund step in where markets cannot absorb early risk, enabling participation until value becomes legible. And this is what happened for us. The support of the Cultural Development Fund didn't just support a space, it absorbed early risk. It established credibility and signaled to the wider market that this sector is worth investing in and building around. And this is the second half of infrastructure. Not just enabling creation, but enabling conversion. And in today's economy, that kind of infrastructure cannot happen without technology. The internet digitized cultural goods and scaled them globally. AI is now reshaping authorship and ownership. And what makes this moment particularly important is timing. In Saudi Arabia, these systems are being built while the sector is still forming, when policy, capital, education, production can move together rather than having to retrofit later. This creates a rare opportunity to organize value early, protect creative labor as it scales, and allow human expression to grow alongside technology, not to compete with it. And in my opinion, this is one of the most effective ways to unlock human capital at scale. For me, I see culture is what allows human capital to thrive and survive, not as an abstract idea, but as skills, experiences, judgment, creativity, and the ability to participate meaningfully in society and the economy. It is also one of humanity's oldest forms of communication. It carries meaning, memory, identity across generations. But today, its impact depends on whether people can earn a living from it. Because when creative work remains informal, talent exits early. But when the right conditions exist, practice stabilizes, experience deepens, and people stay long enough to build mastery. And this is how human capital is unlocked. In a world shaped by volatility, division, and rapid change, dialogue does not emerge by chance. It is built deliberately. When people are able to contribute, continue, and grow. And to me, that is the responsibility we share as leaders, as institutions, and as policymakers. And at Al-Mashtal, we work at that intersection, translating the intangible value of culture into tangible economic participation, and creative potential into lasting contribution, with the support of our institutions and national vision. Because culture is not only a reflection of who we are, it is how societies decide how we will become. Thank you very much.